Hey everybody, good to see you guys. That little intros are random and limited from Restream, so I thought today's was appropriate just because it's kind of a ticking clock, countdown prophecy kind of thing. So a little boring, but it does the job. We got Droid on panel as always. How you doing?
I'm doing fine, thank you, ma'am. And thank you all for joining us today. May the Lord bless you this day.
Awesome. I think I've greeted everybody in chat so far. Now we have the Arc Ash is the only name I haven't seen. Good to see you. And I know there are others listening. So, yeah, we're going to do Daniel today. It was especially chapter 11. But first, we're going to get into when it was written. And I'm going to try to remember to ask toward the end because there's so much material to cover. I don't know what to do in just 1 hour, but I might just keep going on prophecy because I've been reading. I just got a few days ago a huge, almost 800 pound, 800 pound, 800 page book called Footsteps of the Messiah by Arnold Fruchtenbaum. And just the first couple of chapters so far that I've read are so much detail and really do help to clarify some things that even I wasn't entirely sure about. So, but of course, I can't just read the book to you. So, copyright and all that. I might think about trying to summarize as I go or something like that, make something visual to look at. But we'll see. And we're getting into pretty soon in the US. Let's see, it's 1, 2, 3, 4. Next Thursday, not this coming Thursday, but next Thursday is Thanksgiving holiday in the US. And then, of course, after that, 4 weeks would be Christmas, then New Year's. So we'll just see what we get done. Anyway, none of those holidays are on a Sunday, so might not be any interruption. I don't know, but we'll just see. Good to see you also, Vic. And let's get started on here. First, we have, and most of these links should be in the description. This is JesusWalk.com and Appendix 3, the case for a 6th century dating of Daniel. That's 6th century BC. Good to see you, Jeff. And the writer here is a Dr. Wilson. I don't know who this is, but it seemed like pretty good material. And it begins by saying any study of the dating of the book of Daniel must begin with the dates embedded within the text. Nearly every chapter is tied to some historical event beginning in 605 BC, when Daniel and his friends were deported from Jerusalem to Babylon to serve in the court of Nebuchadnezzar the Great. In addition to the court stories in chapters 1 through 6, Daniel's visions are dated as follows, but I just want to say first before we look at those dates is that having every chapter tied to historical events that anybody reading this could check if they had access to the historical documents is another stamp of the Bible's authenticity because no other religious book, no other prophetic passage, which other religious books have precious few of, gives you the material to debunk it if you could. And this is something that I say is the fingerprint of God on the Bible is fulfilled prophecy and this habit throughout the Bible, whether it's prophecy or some other context, to verify by names, dates, and events, and so on. So anyway, the four or the court, in addition to the court stories in chapter 1 to 6, we have these visions that Daniel had. One was Nebuchadnezzar's dream, and he was the first big leader of Babylon in the second year of his reign, so about 603 BC, and that's from chapter 2, verse 1. Daniel's dream of 4 beasts, which is, we're going to talk about one of the beasts today, in the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, about 553 BC. and that's from chapter 7, verse 1. Daniel's vision of a ram and a goat in the third year of Belshazzar's reign, about 550 BC, chapter 8, verse 1. Daniel's prayer of intercession and vision of the 70 weeks in the first year of Darius, son of Xerxes, about 539 BC. That's chapter 9, verse 1. And we know that 927 starts the 70 weeks prophecy we've talked about before. And by the way, Xerxes is the most commonly known name, the easiest to pronounce. Some passages in the Bible call him Ahasuerus or something like that, if I pronounce it anywhere close. So we'll go with Xerxes. Daniel's vision of the kings of the north and south is a big deal. In the third year of Cyrus, king of Persia, about 536 BC, chapter 10, verse 1, which is getting close to where we're going to focus on today. So based on internal dating, Daniel has been dated in the mid-6th century BC by both Jews and Christians from the earliest times. The only exception to this was a pagan Neoplatonic philosopher named Porphyry of Tyre, who lived about 234 to 305 AD, which is just the centuries after the New Testament was completed. That was completed in around 95 AD. So anything after 100 is after the close of the Bible canon. And so this isn't very far after, okay, about a couple generations. Anyway, a pagan Neoplatonic philosopher, Porphyry, who in a 15-volume work called Against the Christians, tried to discredit Jewish and Christian prophecy by claiming Daniel's visions were written by someone who lived in Judea at the time of Antiochus Epiphanes. And that's the fourth, by the way, Antiochus the fourth. And so instead of predicting the future, this writer describes what has already happened. This was refuted by Jerome in his commentary on Daniel in 407 AD. So another generation or two later. And there it lay for more than 1,000 years. Nobody but this pagan, anti-Christian, Neoplatonic philosopher tried to say that Daniel was written much later than its internal evidence would suggest. During the Enlightenment, when liberal scholars began to question the dating and authorship of dozens of Old and New Testament books, did you want to say something, Jordan? Sorry.
I just wanted to ask, wouldn't they already have that knowledge from the Hebrews themselves and not have to even speculate that, oh, this was just recently created? This was something that the Hebrews must have had from, years and years ago, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it says that both Christians and Jews accepted the early dating, in the 6th century BC. It was just this pagan who came along after Christianity who tried to say it was not written when it was claimed. And he was the only one for another 1,000 years. So this is a modern phenomenon to question the dating of the book of Daniel, but people closer to the time believed it to be in the 6th century BC. So we know what the motives are for such things. We're not going to make a claim, but we strongly suspect what the motives are and the source of those attempts to discredit the Bible. Anyway, during the Enlightenment, liberal scholars began to question the dating and authorship of dozens of Old and New Testament books, not just Daniel. That began to change. Since the early 1800s, there was a lot of changes that started in the 1800s. Porphyry's position became the basis of what's called the German literary critical movement dating, spreading the theory far and wide so that by the mid-20th century, that's the 1900s, this was the dominant scholarly position. That doesn't make it right. It just means that the scholars were following one outlier and everything built on that, just as we might see later in Second Thessalonians 2, where it talks about the meaning of the word apostasia, that everybody follows the King James, whereas before the King James, it said the departing or departure instead of falling away or some kind of spiritual departure. So that sort of thing is not unique to just this issue of when Daniel was written, but I'm just saying that it is a problem that developed much longer than the close of the Bible canon. They didn't believe that accurate prophecy of the future was possible. That's what it is to be a liberal scholar. To consider or presume or a priori claim that you just can't have accurate prophecy of the future. They decided that first and then built theories afterwards. Their view was that the Hebrew prophets were forth-tellers, not foretellers, though a careful study of the prophet shows that this is a clear overstatement, to be polite. However, it's only fair to say that some respected evangelical scholars, such as Goldingay, F.F. Bruce, and N.T. Wright, also hold to a late dating. Now, I don't know the first guy, but Bruce and Wright are not idiots, and they're well studied, and they have a lot of good things to say. F.F. Bruce is especially a renowned scholar, and yet he holds to a later dating of Daniel. But even renowned scholars aren't immune from human frailty and will sometimes have prejudices of their own. We know from Dr. Michael Heiser, who passed recently, that although he was, as far as I can tell, a saved person, a Christian, he nonetheless had a low view of Scripture when it comes to um, how dependable it is as fact and literal history, as opposed to what he presumes before he goes to the text. Now, his expertise was in languages and cultures, but not theology, and as far as I can tell, not logic, because he would reach such ridiculous conclusions that even undermine his claim to believe that Jesus rose from the dead, which of course violates every quote unquote scientific law. So if it's because of science is higher in authority than the Bible, then you really don't respect the Bible as the Word of God. And this is why I think prophecy is so important. It takes up a third of the Bible, and no other religious text does this, and nobody is as accurate as the Bible's prophecy, especially in Daniel, which we're going to get into chapter 11 and look at some extensive footnotes that show what a soap opera was going on. Soap operas today got nothing on Daniel 11, on the history that he's recording in advance. And so we'll see that this detail is what vexes the quote unquote liberal scholars and makes people want to follow one outlier, this pagan philosopher, instead of just going with the evidence, internal and external. So the late dating, why did it went somewhere when I just clicked to activate the page? Let's try this again. The late dating of Daniel is primarily based on claims that, and we have 4 claims that they're going to go over. 1, that Daniel contains historical inaccuracies concerning 6th century kings and events. 2, that Daniel contains Greek words that wouldn't have been possible if it had been written in the 6th century. 3, that Daniel's predictions of the future are too accurate to be authentic prophecy. Therefore, they must have been written after the fact. This is that a priori assumption. It's kind of redundant, but anyway. 4, apocalyptic literature didn't flourish until after 200 BC. By the way, apocalyptic has come to mean in more recent times doomsday, whereas the word in Greek, which opens the book of Revelation, which is why we call it Revelation, apocalypsis, means to unveil, to reveal, to make clear instead of leaving it hidden or secret. And so apocalyptic, though, didn't mean what it used to mean originally, but that's the name that has stuck for anything to do with end times doomsday prophecies. And they're saying that apocalyptic type literature, as we use the term today, didn't flourish until after 200 BC. So let's get into questions of historical accuracy. Those who hold to a late date for Daniel have questioned the historical accuracy of several passages in Daniel that purport to be from the 6th century. We will look at those one by one. 1, the siege of Jerusalem in the 3rd year of Jehoiakim, who was king in Israel. The very first verse in Daniel reads, in the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Judah, not Israel, because they were split by then, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. This is disputed on 2 grounds. 1, that Nebuchadnezzar's assault on Jerusalem took place in the 4th year of Jehoiakim's reign, according to Jeremiah 46:2, and not in the 3rd year, according to Daniel 1:1. And 2, that Nebuchadnezzar didn't actually besiege Jerusalem. And these are the sorts of sources that people will quote when they want to say, well, you really don't know, you're only looking at certain information. And I can say that back to them because it depends on which scholars you quote. And you can easily not be aware or not look for scholars who disagree with the position you would prefer. Everybody does that. And we have to be careful and diligent and it takes a lot of work to get both sides of something. The reason for the discrepancy between the third and fourth year is a difference in reckoning systems, pure and simple. Palestinian or Judean and Egyptian reckoning, most common in the Old Testament, counts the months between a king's accession to the throne and the new year as a complete year. The Babylonians, however, began to count a king's reign from the first new year after accession. Since the book of Daniel is written from the point of view of a court officer in Babylon, using the Babylonian system makes good sense. In fact, it's an argument for the early dating of Daniel. The fact that he would say that it's the fourth year instead of the third year, or the other way, it's the other way around. Daniel is the one who said it's third year. The fact that he's using the Babylonian system argues for him having actually been in Babylon, whereas a later forgerer probably wouldn't do that, because you want to hide what you're doing if you're making up fiction. And if you wanted to hide it, you wouldn't give the detail in the first place, and in second place, you wouldn't dispute with other dates that people knew. Anyway, late daters dispute that Nebuchadnezzar actually besieged Jerusalem. Is the other part of the first objection. The Hebrew verb is sur, or however you pronounce that. The root means to make secure a valuable object, such as money. Applied to military action, it means to relentlessly attack an opponent's stronghold. So by context, this is the meaning we would be looking at. Though 2 Kings doesn't specifically use the term besiege, we read that Nebuchadnezzar came up, forcing Jehoiakim to be his vassal, or his puppet, basically. Whether the Babylonian army entered into a full siege of Jerusalem in 605 BC, or just the presence of troops in the area caused enough of a retreat, the bottom line is that Jerusalem capitulated. And at one point, Jehoiakim was forced to be a vassal of Babylon. So whether it's technically the right word for what was going on, the fact is that Babylonian troops were messing with Jerusalem and turning Jehoiakim into a puppet king for them. So much for those objections as far as the siege of Jerusalem in which third or fourth year of Jehoiakim. Then King Belshazzar. Some late daters complain that while Belshazzar is called king in Daniel 5:1, he wasn't the king. Technically, Belshazzar's father, Nabonidus, was king, and Belshazzar served as co-regent with his father about 553 to 539 BC. Nevertheless, Belshazzar functioned as king in Babylon, since Nabonidus was engaged in war and other pursuits far from the capital for nearly a full decade. To see a late date for Daniel based on this point is weak, and I agree, because if the king is absent for 10 years, are you really going to refer to the guy who's acting as king as not the king? I mean, it's quibbling and splitting hairs over what practical terms people would use for what's actually the situation at the time, and for all practical purposes, Belshazzar was king. Third objection, Darius the Mede. Darius the Mede, who appears as the king of Babylon under the Persians, is unknown to history outside of Daniel. Two alternative explanations of the identity of Darius the Mede have been suggested. One, D.J. Wiseman argues that Darius the Mede was merely an alternative title for Cyrus the Persian, which is kind of strange if you ask me. Why would you call a Mede a Persian? In this case, 628 in Daniel would be translated legitimately. So this Daniel prospered during the reign of Darius, namely the reign of Cyrus the Persian. And he says, I don't find this compelling. Again, why would you call a Mede a Persian? Or a Persian a Mede? Whitcomb argues that Darius the Mede was in fact Gubaru, whoever that is, I'm not familiar with that name, the governor of Babylon and the region beyond the river, exercising virtually royal powers in Babylon, and hence not improperly called king. I think this is much more likely. We still don't know anything about this Darius the Mede from contemporary documents. So unless we want to say Daniel just made this guy up, we have to also say that everybody since Daniel, all the Hebrew scholars and then the Christian scholars, all just blindly swallowed this lie without checking into it. And I don't think that's the case. They just don't have enough to go on to say who this guy was. But in all practicality, which is common a lot of times, is people had more than one name. And sometimes you called, as they're explaining here, someone king because that's the person you can see who's right here actually running the place. And if somebody else has the title and they're off, globetrotting, I hate to use the term, but you know what I mean, running around doing things, are they really the king? They just kind of handed it off to their second in command and aren't even there. So these aren't really strong objections. Okay, they can't be hand wave dismissed, but they're not strong either. The term Chaldean or Chaldean, I've always heard it pronounced Chaldean. Some have questioned the use of the word Chaldean in Daniel. The Aramaic word is kasdim. It can be translated either Chaldean by race or as its meaning, learned, of the class of magi, a technical term derived from the reputation of the Chaldean wise men. That is to say, when we read of the magi coming to see baby Jesus in the New Testament, that they could have easily been called Chaldeans because Chaldeans were the first of something. And so if you were a wise magi person, you were called a Chaldean. So depends on the context. In Daniel's day, Babylon was ruled by leaders drawn from the clan of the Chaldeans who lived in the area around Babylon. To claim that Daniel is late based on its use of this word is again weak. So there are plausible explanations, and I don't think either side has a slam dunk on the other, but I think one side's arguments are stronger, and the objections to the early date of Daniel aren't really strong enough to overthrow it. That is to say, it's their burden of proof to say it wasn't written when Daniel says it was written, when he wrote it, and when he lived, which isn't in dispute. When Daniel lived isn't in dispute. It's when this writing happened that's in dispute. So internal evidence favors the late dating or the early dating. The late dating has a burden of proof to overcome that, and so far they really haven't, in my opinion. Questions of language. The late date of Daniel was supported by scholars who claim that the Aramaic sections in Daniel belong to a later period. However, more recent studies have found that the Aramaic used in Daniel was used in the courts and chancelleries from the 7th century BC on. So, that right about that time on, and tends to support an early date for Daniel. So it says more recent studies. So if someone is claiming that all the scholars say it's a later date, I don't think they're up to date on scholarship on the issue. The presence of Persian and Greek loanwords in the text of Daniel, primarily in the words for musical instruments, that's where most of it was long taken as proof that Daniel was written in the Greek period after Alexander's conquest. Alexander the Great, a couple hundred years before Christ. It is now generally recognized that there were many earlier contacts with the Greeks and Persians, including Greek colonies in Egypt in the mid-7th century BC, and Greek mercenary troops in the Battle of Carchemish in 605 BC. Also, the names of musical instruments could well be found along with the instruments themselves at the Persian court, and they have sources for these claims. Today, linguistic arguments for a late date of Daniel are considered quite weak. And I would say across the board, linguistic arguments are weak, as has been admitted in some, I don't even remember when and what video I did it in, but where it was made clear that when people try to say, for example, that more than one person wrote the books of Moses, they base this on linguistic differences, but these have turned out to be so weak and laughable that nobody that really cares about truth and accuracy even tries to perpetuate them, even if they're anti-Christians. And so linguistic arguments are not anything that's going to help win an argument on the dating of Daniel or anything else in the Bible. Because as it's been pointed out many times by many people, the same person can write very differently depending on whether they're making a personal letter to a friend or making a technical document or arguing a case in a court of law. The same person can do all those things. They can write poetry. It depends on the context of how they're going to write. So linguistic arguments are not good arguments for when to date something, unless you're talking about the alphabet they use, or that there are no other instances of this kind of lettering used at the time the book was supposed to be written, things like that. But we don't have that problem in Daniel and in the Bible. In fact, the problem is that people come with presuppositions about what can and can't be possible, and they're ignorant of, for example, how early Greek words and Persian words and Aramaic words could get into a Hebrew text. Those aren't problems. Now, the thing about apocalyptic literature, one argument for a late date comes from the observation that apocalyptic literature seems to have been popular between 200 and 100, or 200 BC and 100 AD. So overlapping the time of the New Testament. However, most apocalyptic literature seems to copy the style of Daniel as one of the earliest examples of apocalyptic. If the copies occur between 200 BC and 100 AD, the prototype doesn't have to be from the same period. In fact, it must be prior. So Daniel is the original that the others copied in their style of end times prophecy sorts of things, or even not necessarily end times, but future to whenever the people are writing their opinions about things. And so again, many copies imply an original, and if we have copies of all this kind of literature from 200 BC, then the original must be before. And since these copies are patterned after Daniel's style, then Daniel must be earlier than that. Daniel seems to have been widely accepted as authoritative scripture from the 2nd century BC onwards. So that's the time about the beginning of apocalyptic literature when Daniel was declared to be authentic. Daniel was a popular book in the Qumran community, with 8 fragments of the Hebrew text found there. The oldest of these seems to have been copied in the late 2nd century BC, only a half century after the Maccabean period. If Daniel had been written in the Maccabean period, 50 years just isn't enough time for it to have been considered canonical authoritative scripture. In other words, it long predated this 200 BC, and even for the Qumran community, only 50 years spans between the Maccabean period and these copies that the Qumran community had. And so how did they have enough time to establish something as canon and then decide it was a forgery? And there's no new evidence that came in during that time. So the rise of apocalyptic literature is another bad argument, or a weak argument at best, because it actually proves the opposite. It's a hostile witness. They're saying, well, look, we've got this style of literature. Well, what's it based on? Oh, it looks a lot like Daniel. And Daniel had to be before that. So this argument is not in their favor. And then we have pseudonymous writings. I cannot talk today. Those who contend for a late date of Daniel argue that is an example of the pseudonymous quasi-prophecy that is a common feature of Jewish apocalyptic literature of the period. They claim that everyone of the time knew that the attributed authors weren't the real authors. Somebody named Longman disagrees, and I share his concerns. Quote, for this type of literature to work, that is, if it's to achieve its intended effect on an audience, they cannot know that it's quasi-prophecy. In order to build up the reader's confidence that God controls history and that he's sovereign over the future, the reader must believe that the prophecy is precisely that. That is to say, you can't let your audience know that it's not real prophecy if you're doing this to fool them. So if everyone knew they weren't real, then what's the point of writing it? Unless you're going to call it fiction, which is not what the critics of the Bible are claiming. They're claiming that people didn't know it was fiction. When a book gives the specific dates for its composition, to say that it's written hundreds of years later implies an intent to deceive the readers that the prophecy was actually written by the prophet Daniel. To make Daniel a deception doesn't do justice to its widespread use as authentic scripture by Jesus, the apostles, and the early church. I don't think you can get around that, and I agree with him. I mean, Jesus said Daniel was prophecy, written long before. And he said there were still things that remained, because when he talked about the abomination of desolation, he specifically mentioned Daniel the prophet. In conclusion, despite arguments to the contrary, I believe that an excellent case can be made for a 6th century dating of the book of Daniel. My conclusion is that the book of Daniel seems to have been written in Babylon by Daniel near the end of his life, about 530 BC, or compiled in Babylon by his disciples from Daniel's writings shortly thereafter. So certainly not any later than about 500 BC, which predates every other apocalyptic literature type by 300 years. And then we have these endnotes here. Any questions or comments before I go on? All right, I don't see anything in the chat. Let's see. Anne Frank's diary. Yeah, I don't know anything about that, whether she used a ballpoint pen or not. I'm pretty sure she didn't, but how would you know? You'd have to check into the claims made. Anyway, I think we can go on since we've established that Daniel is in fact written way before these events that we're going to talk about. So now we're going to look quickly at something by Bible.org by John Walvoord, which is another big name in Bible prophecy. And I'm going to have to skip through this because it's incredibly long. In the interpretation of biblical prophecy, the 7th chapter of Daniel, so we're getting close to 11 here, and we will read 11 next, occupies a unique place. But just to stop again and say, throughout Daniel, like 2, 7, 9, 11, 12, are basically the same visions from different angles. I mean, they're different separate visions that God gives, but they're of the same prophetic sequence, we'll say. So the 7th chapter of Daniel occupies a unique place as interpreted by conservative expositors, that is to say, people who believe it was written when it was written, not 200 BC or merely 200 BC. The vision of Daniel provides the most comprehensive and detailed prophecy of future events to be found anywhere in the Old Testament, and that's why we're focusing on Daniel. Although its interpretation has varied widely, conservative scholars generally are agreed, with few exceptions, that Daniel traces the course of 4 great world empires, namely Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and Rome, concluding in the climax of world history in the second coming of Jesus Christ and the inauguration of the eternal kingdom of God, so the millennial kingdom, as represented by as a 5th and final kingdom, which is from heaven, that's stone cut without hands, that destroys the statue of the 4 world empires. But it's so much deeper than that. Interpreted this way, the chapter forms a major outline of future events to which the additional details are given later in the book of Daniel and in the New Testament, especially book of Revelation. Such a panorama of future events is of great importance to the student of prophecy, as it provides a broad outline to which all other prophetic events may be related. And this is what Revelation does. It puts a whole bunch of Old Testament prophecies, not just from Daniel, but from Joel and Zechariah and all sorts of places, in the order that and doesn't quote any of them verbatim, but makes enough references. There's hundreds and hundreds of allusions to Old Testament prophecies, which you wouldn't put together otherwise. That's what Revelation does. And by the way, it's the revelation of Jesus Christ, not the revelation of John, and not the revelation by Jesus Christ. Even though it is by him, it says of him. So because people complain that Revelation, I forget who it was that said, it might have been Luther, who said Revelation ought to reveal, and he found it incomprehensible. And I think it was him that wanted to leave it out of the canon because he couldn't understand it, which is a dumb reason to leave something out. But anyway, the point is, he misunderstood. Luther, I'm pretty sure, misunderstood that it's Jesus being revealed. Jesus, the revelation of Jesus, to reveal him, not necessarily to make everything so plain that you can understand it in any century, because as Daniel will say at the end of his book, that knowledge will be increased toward the end. And so Daniel is told to seal up his prophecies, that is to say, just put a lid on it because it concerns the distant future from Daniel, whereas John is told to reveal Jesus Christ through these prophecies. Anyway, conservative interpreters are agreed that this is genuine prophecy, that it's futuristic, that is related to future events from Daniel's point of view, and that its culmination is the kingdom of which Christ brings. In the intro to his discussion, The Four World Kingdoms, someone named Kyle, has well summarized the issues involved in chapter 7. He writes, "There yet remains for our consideration the question, what are the historical world kingdoms which are represented by Nebuchadnezzar's image in chapter 2, and by Daniel's vision of 4 beasts rising up out of the sea? Almost all interpreters understand these two visions are to be interpreted in the same way. The four kingdoms or dynasties, which are symbolized in chapter 2 by the different parts of the human image, that is to say, the statue with the head of gold, the chest and arms of silver, the belly and thighs of brass, the legs of iron, and the feet and toes of iron mixed with clay. From the head to the feet are the same as those which were symbolized by the four great beasts rising up out of the sea. And Fruchtenbaum agrees, and most, and like I said, I might talk at the end here today about whether we want to cover that book. Kyle continues, these four kingdoms, according to the interpretation commonly received in the church, are the Babylonian, Medo-Persian, Macedonian, Greek. They include Macedonian in Greek. It's kind of blended together, and the Roman. In this interpretation and opinion, Luther observes, all the world are agreed, so it might have not have been him. It was one of those names anyway. And history and fact abundantly establish it. This opinion prevailed until about the end of the last century, as far as Luther is just talking about the four past empires, so he could still be the one that didn't like Revelation, but nobody disagreed about the sequence of these empires. This prevailed until the end of the last century, for the contrary opinion of individual earlier interpreters had found no favor. But from that time, when faith in the supernatural origin and character of Bible prophecy was shaken by deism and rationalism, that's where we get into that, what was it called in the 1800s? Then as a consequence, with the rejection of the genuineness of the book of Daniel, the reference of the fourth kingdom to the Roman world monarchy was also denied. So and there's a lot of motivations, pointing fingers, where someone will say, well, the Catholics were trying to say it's the Protestants who were breaking away in Second Thessalonians, where it says, except there come in the apostasia first. Some take it as a falling away from the faith, and then others will counterattack. And this is how a lot of things go throughout church history. As I did a series once a long time ago on the reformers and their stepchildren, that this was church history is a history of action and reaction. And if we don't understand that, we'll misinterpret a lot of historical passages. But anyway, this sort of thing happened regarding interpreting Daniel as well. Fourth kingdom is Roman, as well as considering the second and third kingdoms as Medo-Persian and Grecian. So anyway, I'm going to skip through a little bit of that. And this is Matthew 24:15 is where Jesus quotes Daniel. He says, so when you see the abomination of desolation spoken about by Daniel the prophet standing in the holy place, let the reader understand. And then he goes on to talk about what the Jews should do when they see this. So he's quoting Daniel as a prophecy, not a pseudo-prophecy. He says, this has happened before, it's going to happen again. In reference to Daniel 11, it says the abomination of desolation is Daniel 12:11. I don't know if I said that right. Daniel 12:11 is what Jesus was quoting specifically. Prophecies of the book of Revelation written late in the first century, so 95 AD is about the most common date, anticipate as future the fulfillment of parallel prophecies in Daniel. For example, Revelation 13 parallels the final stage of Daniel's fourth empire. This could not, therefore, refer to events fulfilled in the second century BC. Daniel 9:26 prophesies the Messiah will be cut off and the city of Jerusalem destroyed, events which occurred in the Roman period. The author of Second Esdras, which is an apocryphal book, so between Old and New Testaments, who lived near the close of the first century AD and might have known John the Apostle, clearly identifies the fourth kingdom of Daniel's vision as the Roman Empire. To these arguments may be added the details of the second, third, and fourth empires throughout the book of Daniel, which harmonize precisely with the Medo-Persian, Grecian, and Roman empires. Obviously, the first one was Babylon. The alternate views of the critics, where they try to name other entities, can only be held if Daniel's prophecies could be considered in factual error in several places, as the details of the prophecies do not really coincide with the critics' theories. Notice it's the critics' theories they don't coincide with, not with actual internal or external evidence. For these reasons, conservative scholars have held firmly to the traditional identification of the four empires of chapter 7 of Daniel as in chapter 2. So then they go on to That's the same thing this other Jesus Walk article talked about, where they say he lived later and that this was pseudo prophecy, pseudo Daniel, that it's a symbol of struggle of good and evil, and that the author was maybe trying to predict the outcome of various wars. This interpreted requires many statements in Daniel as less than factual and actually not scriptural prophecy at all, even though the Jews and Christians all said it was. Their point of view as a whole is an expansion of the unbelief of Porphyry rather than a product of a reverent believing study of the scriptures. So even this reverent believing study of the scriptures, people say, well, you're biased to find that this is canon. But that's not the case, because we're talking about Jews as well, and how Revelation borrows heavily from the Old Testament. And so if you call Revelation false, you're also calling a large portion of the Old Testament false, which the Jews wouldn't do. And as I've said before, there are other reasons we know this is authentic literature, because the Jews and the apostles would not make up the things they made up that put them in a bad light and often put women in a good light. So again, it's a weak argument against the factual dating, the early dating of Daniel and a lot of other things. And again, the critics all just follow the leader of this pagan philosopher, just the way people follow the King James on 2 Thessalonians 2, which I'm going to go to real quick because I can't go through all of this. I mean, this thing is like miles and miles long. I know a lot of this is references, but very long article, which you can read at your leisure. Now let's get to Daniel 11, because we need to get on that. We only got 20 minutes, but I'll probably go over today. But first, this is just briefly to mention, wow, that cursor got big for a second. I don't know why. Constable's notes on this as well, and how he'll emphasize it as talking about these various kings, and he'll give you all sorts of information. So we're not going to read through that. We don't have time. But again, this is Constable's notes, another good commentator. Now let's look at, we're going to start here with Daniel 8 a little bit. And I have this footnote popped up because the leader of fierce countenance, as it says in the King James, really means strong of face, and it has to do with treachery and all sorts of things. So let me just read this real quick. This is Daniel 8:19 through 26. Then he said, the angel talking to Daniel said, I'm going to inform you about what will happen in the latter time of wrath, for the vision pertains to the appointed time of the end. The ram that you saw with 2 horns stands for the kings of Media and Persia. This is the angel saying it verbatim. The male goat is the king of Greece. That is Alexander the Great. I don't know if it says that here, but the Javan is the Septuagint name, or the Hebrew name, sorry. And Septuagint, I think, has Greece. But anyway, they're known to be the same thing. And the large horn between its eyes is the first king. That would be Alexander the Great. The horn that was broken, just some, I don't remember which of the notes is one I want to talk about, so I'm just popping them out briefly. The horn that was broken, and in whose place there arose 4 others, stands for 4 kingdoms that will rise from his nation, though they will not have his strength. So the 4 generals of Alexander the Great took over and weren't as strong, any one of them. Toward the end of their rule, when rebellious acts are complete, a rash and deceitful king will arise. Okay, what does rash mean? Rash is where it says strong of face. That's what strong of face means. The King James fierce appearance, having the fierce countenance, you might think this guy is really freaky looking or scary looking, but it doesn't say that. He's just rash. It's a figure of speech. So he's a rash and brash and bold in a bad way, daring and deceitful king will arise. Think the Emperor Palpatine in Star Wars. I mean, it's very much, I wouldn't doubt that they got his character from the book of Daniel, because he's maneuvering in the background. Palpatine was, right? Maneuvering in the background, turning people against each other, manipulating, using intrigue, playing a double life. And it says in this and other passages that this person will be a master of dark arts. a flattering person. So that's the kind of person we're looking for in the beast. And his power, it says, will be great, but will be not by his strength alone, meaning he will have satanic assistance. He will cause terrible destruction. He will be successful in whatever he undertakes. He will destroy powerful people and the people of the holy ones, that is to say, Israel, not the church, by his treachery. I want to see what they have here. The Hebrew term has a primary meaning of skill or insight, but here it has a connotation of cunning and treachery. By his treachery, he will succeed through deceit. He will have an arrogant attitude, and he will destroy many who are unaware of his schemes. He will rise up against the Prince of Princes, that is to say, Jesus, yet it will be broken apart, but not by human agency. That's the stone cut without hands in the vision of the statue. The vision of the evenings and mornings, the 77s and all that was told to you is correct, or that he's going to tell him. Actually, it's in the next chapter, because not everything in Daniel is in chronological order. We have to keep that in mind. But you should seal up the vision, for it refers to a time many days from now. So there's the sealing. All right. And then Daniel 11, this is where it gets really, really detailed. Then a powerful king, and this is starting in verse 3, a powerful king will arise, and this is Alexander the Great, exercising great authority and doing as he pleases. Shortly after his rise to power, his kingdom will be broken up. He died very young and distributed toward the four winds of the sky, but not to his posterity or with the authority exercised, for his kingdom will be uprooted and distributed to others besides these. Those are the four generals. Then the king of the south is Ptolemy the First. There are many Ptolemies, many Seleucids, many Antiochus. That's why you have to pay attention to detail, or you'll get it all wrong. This is Ptolemy the First, the king of the south. Ptolemy south, Seleucid north. North is Syria, because south and north, all the directions are from Jerusalem, specifically, and Israel or Judea in general. So the king of the south is Ptolemy the First. And one of his subordinates will go strong. His subordinate will resist him and will rule a kingdom greater than his. After some years have passed, they will form an alliance. Then the daughter of the king of the south will come to the king of the north. Now, who is this? The daughter refers to Berenice, who was given in marriage to Antiochus II. Berenice, we're going to see her in a minute, daughter of the king of the south, will come to the king of the north to make an agreement, because these things were done for political reasons. But she will not retain her power, nor will he continue in his strength. She, together with one who brought her child, and her benefactor, will all be delivered over at that time. Let's see. I think it's this footnote. Antiochus II, and here's where the soap opera comes in. Antiochus II eventually divorced Berenice and remarried his former wife, Laodice, or Laodice, which you remember that name from one of the 7 churches, the Church of Laodicea. That place was named after her, not the church, the city. So Antiochus II divorced Berenice, remarried his former wife, Laodice, or however you pronounce that, who then poisoned her husband, had Berenice put to death, and installed her own son, Seleucus II, as the Seleucid king. Wow, these people were vicious. Then there will arise in his place, who is the reference to the king of Egypt, one from her family line, and they say this the stock of her roots is probably, they're not saying for sure, Berenice's brother Ptolemy III, who will come against their army and will enter the stronghold of the king of the north and will move against them successfully. He will also take their gods into captivity, that's to say idols, to Egypt, along with their cast images and prized utensils of silver and gold, their sacred instruments. Then he will withdraw for some years from the king of the north. Then the king of the north will advance against the empire of the king of the south, and by this time, they don't have the name for that one, sorry, but will withdraw to his own land. His sons will wage war, mustering a large army that will advance like an overflowing river and carrying the battle all the way to the enemy's fortress. Anyway, there's some difficulties in the text but they say the sons are Seleucus the second and third, and this other guy is Tyrannus. Maybe that's where they get the Lord Tyrannus from Star Wars. And Antiochus III the Great, we haven't got to the fourth yet, then the king of the south will be enraged. This king of the south refers to Ptolemy IV, and will march out to fight against the king of the north, who will also muster a large army, but that army will be delivered into his hand. When the army is taken away, the king of the south will become arrogant. He will be responsible for the death of thousands and thousands of people, but he will not continue to prevail. For the king of the north will again muster an army, one larger than before. At the end of some years, he will advance with a huge army and enormous supplies. So far, we've been following history, okay? But it was future to the time of Daniel. To us, this is history, and that fact is what vexes the liberal scholars and the critics of the Bible, because they don't want this to be accurate. They have a prejudice against supernatural prophecy. So they say, by that reason alone, that there must be some trick here, that it must be a forgery written later, because, and only because, they don't want to believe that prophecy this accurate is possible. I mean, look at this detail. We're not even done yet. In those times, many will oppose the king of the south. And there's a note here. This is Ptolemy V. Those who are violent among your own people, that's the Israelites, will rise up in confirmation of the vision, but they will falter or cause to stay. Just, little Hebrew explanations here. Then the king of the north will advance and will build siege mounds and capture a well-fortified city. The well-fortified city, according to the note, is apparently Sidon. Its capture from the Ptolemies by Antiochus the Great was a strategic victory for the Seleucid kingdom. The forces of the south will not prevail, not even his finest contingents. They will have no strength to prevail. The one advancing against him will do as he pleases, and no one will be able to stand before him. He will prevail in the beautiful land, Israel, and its annihilation will be within his power. His intention will be to come with the strength of his entire kingdom, and he will form alliances. And that was, okay, and that's not the note I wanted. He will give the king of the south a daughter. Now this gets interesting. The daughter is Cleopatra, the daughter of Antiochus, who was given in marriage to Ptolemy V. He will give the king of the south Cleopatra in marriage in order to destroy the kingdom, but it will not turn out to his advantage. Then he will turn his attention to the coastal regions and will capture many of them. But a commander will bring his shameful conduct to a halt. Now, who is this commander? Probably the Roman commander Lucius Cornelius Scipio. Just if anybody knows who that is, they would just might think that's interesting. Will bring his shameful conduct to a halt. In addition, he will make him pay for his shameful conduct. He will then turn his attention to the fortresses of his own land, but he will stumble and fall, not to be found again. They will arise after him one who will send out an exactor. This is Seleucus IV. An exactor, someone like basically a tax collector, someone to collect tribute, to enhance the splendor of the kingdom, but after a few days he will be destroyed, though not in anger or battle. And some people use this phrase, not in anger or battle, to say, well, it couldn't be, the proud king that we're going to talk about couldn't be Antiochus Epiphanes for this and that reason. I've read through the reasons and conversations and arguments between Greek students, and I don't find the arguments compelling. I think the majority view among conservative scholars has probably got the best support. Verse 21, then there will arise in his place a despicable person. And this is where we come to Antiochus IV Epiphanes, the one that Jesus referred to as committing the abomination of desolation. A despicable person to whom the royal honor has not been rightfully conferred. He will come on the scene in a time of prosperity and will seize the kingdom through deceit. This deceit is the common thread of all types and shadows of the beast that we're getting to, and we're not getting there fast enough, but bear with me. Armies will be suddenly swept away in defeat before him. Both they and a covenant leader will be destroyed. And they're saying this is a prince of a covenant. That's what covenant leader means. And after entering into an alliance with him, he will behave treacherously. So treachery, deceit, all these qualities of the beast, which are typed and shadowed in Antiochus Epiphanes IV. He will ascend to power with only a small force. In a time of prosperity for the most productive areas of the province, he will come and accomplish what neither his fathers nor their fathers accomplished. He will distribute loot, spoils, and property to his followers, and he will devise plans against the fortified cities, but not for long. He will rouse his strength and enthusiasm against the king of the south. And who is this by this time? This is Ptolemy Philometor. Doesn't say a number. With a large army, the king of the south will wage war in a large and very powerful army, but he will not be able to prevail because of the plans devised against him, the treachery. Those who share the king's fine food will attempt to destroy him. So he's been infiltrated, and his army will be swept away. Many will be killed in battle. These two kings, their minds filled with evil intentions, will trade lives with one another at the same table, but it will not succeed, for there is still an end to the appointed time. So again, this is such detail that students of history who are not looking to put a prejudice, and only see what they want to see, if they see both sides, will see this stuff happened, and Daniel predicted it, of course, with just telling what God told him. So they trade lies to each other, and then the king of the north will return to his own land, and he will have much property. His mind will be set against the holy covenant, Israel. He will take action and then return to his own land. At an appointed time, he will again invade the south, Egypt, basically, but this latter visit will not turn out the way the former one did. The ships of Kittim will come against him. Who is that? Has various designations in extra-biblical literature. It can refer to a location on the island of Cyprus, or more generally to the island itself, or an inclusive term to refer to parts of the Mediterranean world that lay west of the Middle East, for example, Rome. For ships of Kittim, the Greek Septuagint has Romans, an interpretation followed by a few English versions, such as today's English version. A number of times in the Dead Sea Scrolls, the word is used in reference to the Romans. Other English versions are more generic, ships of the western coastlands. So you can err on the side of caution, or you can come out and say Romans, but it's probably Romans, the ships of Kittim. Let's see, where did they go? There they are. Will come against him, lead him disheartened. He will turn back and direct his indignation against the Holy Covenant. Let's take it out on Israel, who is between these two north and south warring kings. They're getting, the armies are just going back and forth over them. He will return and honor those who forsake the Holy Covenant. He'll look for traitors in Israel. His forces will rise up and profane the fortified sanctuary. So this is him doing the abomination of desolation. Stopping the daily sacrifice, which is again prophesied in the New Testament. In its place, they will set up the abomination that causes desolation. That's the precise thing, is the idol put in the temple compound. And of course, Antiochus, according to other history, also sacrificed a pig, an unclean animal, on the altar. That's this desecration of an opposing God's temple. That's what he did. Then with smooth words, flattery, he will defile those who have rejected the covenant. That is to say, he'll corrupt them. But the people who are loyal to their God will act valiantly. Those who are wise among the people will teach the masses. However, they will fall by the sword and by the flame, and they will be imprisoned and plundered for some time. When they stumble, they'll be granted some help, but many will unite with them deceitfully. That's to say that even the good remnant will be infiltrated again. Even some of the wise will stumble, resulting in their refinement, purification, and cleansing until the time of the end, for it's still the appointed time. This refers, I think, to starting to switch to the future. And that's where the big argument is. And that's the theme of this live stream, which I'm just now getting to toward the end, because it requires so much background. We'll try and get through this. So this is where it starts to switch, because these things haven't happened. The king will do as he pleases. He will exalt and magnify himself above every deity, as it says in the New Testament, everyone who is called God, and he will utter presumptuous things against the God of gods, the God of Israel. He will succeed until the time of the wrath is completed, for what has been decreed must occur. He will not respect the gods of his fathers, not even the God loved by women. It doesn't say he will be homosexual or anything. It says the one desired by women. And so that's the God that they favored, or they will be favoring. He will not respect any God. He will elevate himself above them all. What he will honor is a God of fortresses, a God his fathers did not acknowledge. He will honor with gold, silver, valuable stones, and treasured commodities. He will attack mighty fortresses aided by a foreign deity. To those who recognize him, he will grant considerable honor. He'll place them in authority over many people and parcel out land for a price. In other words, pay to play kind of, if you do things that I want you to do, then I will reward you with possessions. At the time of the end, the king of the south will attack him. And so there's still a king of the south. So even though he's setting up a world or in a world government, and there's interesting detail in Fruchtenbaum's work that I'll have to get to some other time, but there's still opposition to the rule. There are pockets of resistance. Then the king of the north will storm against him. So he is neither, this is what we know about the beast, neither the king of the north or the king of the south. There's only two other directions left. East is generally not considered that. That's where there's another large demonic army coming from in the book of Revelation. That leaves us with west. So basically the Western world is the kingdom of the beast by process of elimination. Anyway, king of the south attacks, king of the north attacks. He will invade the lands, passing through them like an overflowing river. We've seen that phrase before. Then he will enter the beautiful land, Israel. Many will fall, but these will escape: Edom, Moab, and the Ammonite leadership. And there are commentaries on who these are today. He will extend his power, and I think most of it's mostly Jordan and some other things, extend his power against other lands. The land of Egypt will not escape. He will have control over the hidden stores of gold and silver, as well as all the treasures of Egypt. Libyans and Ethiopians will submit to him. But reports will trouble him from the east and the north. So again, here we have, it can't be east unless the east is his land that's being attacked, and that's what's troubling him. But, and the north, I don't know. I'm just letting you know to make note of those terms. And he will set out in a tremendous rage to destroy and wipe out many. He will pitch his royal tents between the seas, that is between the Mediterranean and the Dead Sea, toward the beautiful holy mountain, Mount Zion, but he will come to his end with no one to help him. And some think this refers to him having the deadly wound, that he will be, as far as anybody can tell, killed and then raised from the dead by Satan. And this is when Satan possesses him at the midpoint of the tribulation. And it makes sense in the fact that the phrase appeared to have been slain is also used of the lamb in the early chapters of Revelation, the lamb who appeared to have been slain. So the appearance doesn't mean it wasn't really, it just means you can tell that this lamb was dead and now it's alive. And the same thing is said here of this beast, who at this point, speculating, but it makes sense, is killed, and then Satan raises him from the dead and he becomes the actual beast doing the second half of the tribulation and all that. So anyway, the rest of this, I think, is footnotes. Yeah. So I'm going to show you just this video real quick. I'm not going to play it. It is Footsteps of the Messiah, Study of the Last Days, Session 12, Aerial Ministries. This is Fruchtenbaum's thing, but this guy is from the Australia branch of it, and he just basically goes through the whole book. But I'm reading the book and getting more detail, and there's sometimes when you got to there's questions that came up that made me question, and I want to see if I can get those answered in the book. But going over what we just said, Antichrist moves against the north, moves against the south, moves against the east. What's left? He will succeed in killing those three kings. We remember what the Bible says about an eighth horn that overpowers and uproots three other horns of the 10-horned beast. This is what it is. This is where the three other horns that he takes out are the north, south, and east. He uproots them. He defeats them. They come against him, and so he conquers them, and then the other seven do what he says because they don't want to be conquered too. They saw what he did, and he rises from the dead, and now they're just basically bowing to him, the other seven. So he's saying, Fruchtenbaum is saying, that we know that this beast is coming from the west, and that the north, south, and east are defeated by him. He is killed in battle, but he raises again, and this is how he becomes the eighth horn, the eighth king, and all the other seven give their power to him. I don't have time to get into this today. It just has to do with the rapture, about departing. This is the Matthew's Bible. Just real quick, departing In the Geneva Bible, 1599, but every other one's the King James Forward says rebellion or falling away spiritually. And there's plenty of material to, and Fruchtenbaum, that I consider the pinnacle of Bible prophecy research, was convinced by, uh, what's his name? I just lost his name. Andy Woods, Dr. Andy Woods, that this is, in fact, should be departure, a physical departure, not a spiritual departure. Um, and there's a video of Andy Woods. I should have just clicked on that and I wouldn't have to think of what his name was, where he talks about, he has 5 other uh, points after this about why it's a physical departure. Um, this is something I might go over next. I don't know if I just select that link again because I don't know if I put this one in the description. Another by Fruchtenbaum, Doctrine of Messiah, and um, the Olivet Discourse. I might do that one next. It's also very, very long, but that's why I'm giving you a link so you can look at this stuff. But we might go over this next time. I might stick to prophecy because it's so darn interesting, and I'm reading this book with so much more material, detail, and I don't have any other ideas really. So this is the book, or this is where you can get an electronic version. I might look into that. I have the physical version, but the hard copy. But I just wanted you to see what the book looks like or anything like that. Anyway, let me look real quick at the chat. I know that's a lot of material, but I think the most important thing is that we were trying to find out in Daniel 11 which was history and which was future and why, what to expect from the beast, very much like Antiochus Epiphanes the Fourth. And all this intrigue and detail was written hundreds of years before they happened. It's not humanly possible. Nobody's that good of a guesser. Nobody would try that much detail and give you names and dates and places. And Jesus himself corroborated Daniel being a prophet. So, yeah, by looking at the past, we won't have to, you don't have to be doomed to repeat it. It will happen, but only to people who are not right with God. And that's why you must do this as soon as possible because these things are at the doorstep. We can tell by looking at events of history and how fast the world is circling the drain into total complete depravity on all levels, corruption, lies, um, the political alignments, the world as we know it is faltering and cracking. And Fruchtenbaum says that this is, and I'll give you more detail another time that would explain better than me trying to do that real quick right now. So, anything in the chat that I need to address, Droid, that you saw, or Chow in the chat? Is there anything I need to answer or address?
Nothing that I saw.
Okay. Is it too much to do in one sitting?
I think it's been a wonderful lesson so far. As Chap points out, the footnotes really bring it to life because you don't read that in your Bible when you're flipping through the pages, and preachers don't preach on it from the pulpit. So unless you study the footnotes, you can't see how prophecy has been fulfilled from Daniel chapter 11, and it brings it so much so alive and so vibrant.
Right, exactly. That's why I wanted to do that, because we had Cleopatra mentioned, we had, um, all the Ptolemies and the Seleucids and stuff that we can verify from history that Daniel prophesied hundreds of years in advance. And because of that, we have absolute confidence in what hasn't happened yet. And we've got all this detail, and we know who the kings of the north, south, and east are. So, and they seem to be geographic rather than genetic as far as who's in the lands at a particular time. Um, because there have always been mixtures of people, interbreeding and whatnot. And so I think, there's always been questions in my mind as to whether prophecy should be taken genetically or geographically. And geographic seems to make a lot more sense. because it talks about lands with borders and rivers and mountains and things to identify them by. And this, again, this detail, we know this history happened in the Middle East, not in Africa, not at the North Pole. So when people try to say that Israel was really down here or up there, they haven't looked into it carefully. They're in defiance of all kinds of detailed evidence. And because we study in detail and we know we won't be fooled by that sort of thing. But yeah, these are awesome footnotes. This is the Net Bible. I would have used the what's it called? The Olive Tree Bible app, which Chow was kind enough to get me some modules for. But the Net Bible notes in there are very limited. They didn't include the full set of notes. I don't know if I'd have to get that separately, but I can get them right here for free off of Bible Gateway. So evidently they paid for the rights to show those notes. So I don't have them in my app, which is why I'm showing the website instead. But definitely go to Bible Gateway and look at the Net Bible and read the passage for yourself. And you can go over this again, or you can play the video back. But unless anybody has an objection, because I don't think I'm going to hurt my viewership by staying on prophecy, because after all, we did, I don't know how many weeks on women in the Bible, and we still have our 9 or 10 viewers. So I hope it would be better someday. I hope prophecy is more interesting. It should be, because we're living it out. But I got to do what I feel led to do, unless somebody tells me I really need to get off this topic. But I'm going to stick with it, I think, unless somebody has a major objection. So, but yeah, I haven't tried Bible Gateway Plus, but yeah, there's so many good online tools. I have some computer apps that I could use. Some of those are more handy on a phone if you're away from home and you want access to some information that's easier to get on an app. But you can't, you'll get enough to do to keep you busy by looking at these. And again, I'm recommending Footsteps of the Messiah for my copy has 800 pages in it with appendices and things. And that's shorter than an earlier version. But this one, the one I got, is updated 2020, I think, and it has his updated view on Second Thessalonians. So anyway, yeah, let's do prophecy until we can't do it anymore. So, all right. Well, we'll look forward to Olivet Discourse next time. And sometime after that, I might see what I can find. Other than, you can watch the video series yourself on Footsteps of the Messiah. Let's see, where was that? Oh, I had it here somewhere. I don't know where it went. Yeah, this one. Ariel Ministries Australia. Went through the entire book. So I don't know that I'll do that, but I might try to do highlights or something, because each one of these, there's like, in a playlist, there's like 26 videos, and they're each an hour long or 45 minutes long on average. So about 24 hours of study, and you just sit back and listen. But it's interesting stuff. So I don't know that I'll go through the book as I'm reading it, but there are some, I'm going to try to take notes as I go along, and maybe I'll go over those. But next week, we'll do the Olivet Discourse. And we'll see you then. Thanks for coming, everybody. Do you want to say goodbye there, Droid?
Thanks for coming, everybody. Thank you, Paul, for having me. I pray the Lord bless you all this day.
Amen. Everybody take care, and